How's it going, ladies and gentlemen? My name is Kaz and welcome back to another video. In this video, we're going to code an internal legitbot or a legitimate aimbot, whatever you want to call it, together, and it's going to be pretty cool. I'm in game over here so that I can show you exactly what we're going to be making. But before we go any further, I would like to say that if you are a hardcore CSGO hacker guy, we're not going to be using prediction, we're not going to be disabling interpolation, we're not going to be syncing matrices, we're not going to be fixing animations. It's going to be a very simple, fully working, legitimate aimbot. So anyway, if I grab my AK over here, there's an enemy over there. It's going to be FOV based, so if I shoot over here, we have no aimbot, but as soon as we enter the FOV, it's going to lock onto him. As you can see, there is some smoothing. You can tune that to however you like. And furthermore, it actually has a visibility check. So let's go ahead and get the peak spray walls over here. Taking a look at this guy, if I shoot, as you can see, we aimbot onto him, just like this. Now, if he's behind a wall, he clearly is still in our FOV range. There's no locking going on here. Once again, if he's visible, we're going to lock onto him. So this means you are not going to be aimbotting players who are hidden. So I'll stop wasting your time. Let's get into it. All right, so first things first, you're going to head down to the description down below. You're going to click on the first link and you're going to come over here to this GitHub repository. This is my base repository. It is a cheat base. We're going to use it to code our legitbot on. So to download the code, we're going to go ahead and click this green code button and we're going to download as a zip. Once you've done that, you'll find in your downloads folder, you will have a based-master.zip. We're going to go ahead and double click on that, and we're going to extract it to our desktop, just like that. Now I'm going to rename this folder. I'm going to call it based aimbot so that I know what it is. And now we can enter the folder and double click on the based.sln file, which will open it up in Visual Studio. I'm using Visual Studio 2022 for those who are wondering, but this will work fine with pretty much any other version. So first things first, we're going to come to the top here. We're going to switch from debug to release, and we're going to switch from x64 to x86. Next, we're going to click on this arrow over here to show what's in the solution. Right now, it is using this horrible Visual Studio sort of filter thing. We're going to disable that by clicking the show all files button over here, which will show it as it is on our disk. Now we can go into the src folder and go into the hacks folder. Taking a look over here, we have a misc.h, and we're sort of going to base our aimbot off of the same structure. So to begin, we're going to right click on this hacks folder. We're going to add a new item, and we're going to add an aimbot.h, just like that. Next, we're going to add another file, and that's going to be the corresponding aimbot.cpp. Just like so. Now, the reason we have a .h file and a .cpp file is so that we can expose the function in the header file, and we can actually have the function's code in the source file. So over here, I'm in misc.h. If I right click on run bunny hop and I go to definition, as we can see over here is the actual bunny hop code, and that is in the misc.cpp file over here. All you need to do is include the misc.h file and you can call run bunny hop. Anyway, going back to our aimbot.h file, we are going to begin. So let's start by creating the namespace. Going to be namespace hacks. This is just so that these aren't global functions, just so that they are hidden in a namespace. And we're going to have a function in here that's going to be void run aimbot. Now, run aimbot is going to take one parameter, and that's going to be a user CMD pointer. So before we do that, we need to forward declare the cuser CMD class, just like this. And now we can have a pointer to it without it actually needing to be defined. So it's going to be a pointer to CMD, and we're going to make this no except and just add a semicolon like that. Now, the reason we can forward declare this and use it in a function is because we are using a pointer. This is declared elsewhere in the program. So if we right click and go to definition, this is where it's defined in cusercmd.h. Anyway, now we can go ahead and click on this, right click and say quick actions, and we can say create definition of run aimbot in aimbot.cpp. Cool, now heading over to our aimbot.cpp file, we now actually can start writing our aimbot. First things first, we're going to go ahead and include our globals file. So taking a look over here in core, we have a couple files. We're going to need globals. Why do we need globals? Because globals holds our local player. So we're going to go ahead and include globals. Hashtag include core globals.h. And the last thing we need to include is actually our interfaces. This holds a list to all the interfaces that we're going to be using. So back in aimbot.cpp, hashtag include core and interfaces. Just like that. All right, so now we can get started. Okay, but before we do that, let's go over here into hooks.cpp. And as you can see over here, we are hashtag including hacks and misc. Let's go ahead and do the same thing and include our aimbot files. So hashtag include, we're going to include hacks and aimbot.h. Now we can scroll down over here to the create move. And as you can see, we have our example bhop running over here. Let's run our aimbot down here. So that's going to be hacks run aimbot. and we're going to pass in the CMD. So this code is only going to be run when our local player is valid and when our local player is alive already. So that's pretty important. You should know that if you're not using this base, if you want to use this in your own code, we're already checking that local player is valid and local player is alive. Anyway, so let's go back to our aimbot. The first thing we're going to check is if we are actually shooting. The reason we do this is because we only want our aimbot to run when we are actually trying to shoot our gun, right? So we're going to say if exclamation mark and then in brackets CMD, and we're going to say buttons, right? So this is actually what's happened is before create move gets run, they actually pull the input, they get what buttons you're clicking down, and it sets specific bits inside of this integer, the integer called buttons over here. So we can say if buttons and C uses CMD, we're going to say in attack. So we're saying here, if we aren't trying to attack, we're going to return. So if we aren't trying to shoot anything, we're just going to exit out of this program. I mean, we're going to exit out of this function before we do anything else. Next, we're just going to add a simple check. We don't want to aimbot if we are trying to defuse the bomb, right? That's going to be a problem. So we're going to say if globals, we're going to say if globals local player is defusing, return. Okay, we don't want to try aimbot if we are defusing. Next, we're going to get our active weapon. This is the weapon that we are holding when we try and attack. We can do that by creating a C entity pointer, and we're going to call it active weapon. And that's going to be equal to globals, local player, and get active weapon, just like that. Next, we need to actually make sure that we got the active weapon. So if exclamation mark active weapon, return. So if active weapon is null, we're going to exit out of this function. Next, we're going to get the type of the weapon because we don't really want to be, we don't want to be aimbotting when we have a knife, right? Or we don't want to be aimbotting when we have a grenade out. So we're going to say const int weapon type is equal to weapon active weapon get weapon type. And this is going to return an int that corresponds to the weapon type. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to switch on this int. So we're going to create a switch statement and we're going to switch on weapon type. Now the weapons that we want to let through, right? So let's go over this. We're going to say case C entity, and we want to let through first of all, we want to let through machine guns, make a couple copies of these, weapon type underscore. So we want to let through machine guns. We want to let through rifles. We want to let through shotguns. We also want to let through snipers, and the last thing we're going to let through is what's it called? Pistols. We want to let through pistols, just like that. So basically what's going to happen is if the weapon type is not a machine gun, not a rifle, not a shotgun, not a sniper, or not a pistol, it's going to come to this case over here. And what we're going to do is we're going to just return out of this function, right? So if it isn't one of these, we're going to return. So if we're holding a knife or something like that, we're just going to jump out of this function. We don't need it. Now what we're going to do inside of this case over here, let's add some brackets so that it's more clear, is first of all, we're going to check if the weapon actually has ammo, right? Because if we don't have ammo, what's the point of aimbotting? So if exclamation mark weapon get, sorry, it's called active weapon get clip. So if exclamation mark active weapon get clip, then we're going to return out of this function, right? So this means if get clip returns 0, we're just going to leave the function. And next, we're going to do a pretty specific check over here. Sorry, we need to add break first of all at the end here. But next, we're going to add a specific check here. If we have a sniper, we only want to aimbot when we are scoped in, right? So we're going to say if weapon type equals weapon sniper, just like this, right? So if this is the case, then we're going to say if exclamation mark globals local player is scoped. Okay, it seems I have a spelling error over here. This needs to be is scoped. I'll fix that. So yeah, if globals local player is scoped, if exclamation mark globals local player is scoped. So if we aren't scoped, we're going to return. Just going to leave the function just like that. And otherwise we break. So we're going to get the weapon type. And if the weapon is one of these weapons, we're going to check if it has ammo. And then we're going to check if it's a sniper. If we are not scoped, we're going to return. Otherwise it's going to break. Break means it's going to come to after the switch statement. But if it isn't one of these, it's going to come to this default statement and it's just going to return out of the function. So what this means is at this point in the code, we actually have a weapon that we want to aimbot with. And if you're smart, you can add this to a menu. You can say, you can use these weapon types to sort of determine a whole bunch of different things about the weapon. Anyway, let's actually get into coding the interesting part, the aimbot. So first things first over here, we're going to make a C vector, a 3D vector, and we're going to call this best angle. and we're going to initialize this to nothing. So what that means is this best angle is just going to be 0, 0, 0. And then we're going to make a float best FOV, and we're going to initialize this to something like 5, right? So let's initialize it to 5. This means that currently our FOV is going to be 5, right? So you'll see how this works in just a moment, but for now you just need these two. And this is because we're going to use an algorithm where we're going to sort of loop through the player list. We're going to compare it to this value over here, and we're going to use this loop to determine the best entity that we want to aim at. So let's go ahead and do that. First of all, we need to loop through the player list. So we're going to go for int I equals 1, while I is smaller than interfaces, globals, max clients. We're going to increment I. Now we can create a C entity pointer. We're going to call this player, and this is going to be equal to interfaces, entity list, get entity from index I, right? So we're going to be getting entities from this for loops index. Now there's a very big chance that a player doesn't exist at a specific index. So we're going to say if exclamation mark player, go ahead and continue, right? So continue means that we're just going to jump to the next index. So let's say there's no player at index 1. It's going to come over here. It's going to say continue. It's going to go to index 2. It's going to try index 2 and so on and so forth. Now you might be wondering why this starts at 1 and not 0. That's because index 0 is always the world entity, and max clients will usually be 64. So I actually have a mistake here. It needs to be smaller than or equal to. So you just need to add an equal sign over here. All right, let's continue. Next, we're going to check if player is dormant or exclamation mark player is alive, right? So if the player is dormant or if they aren't alive, we are going to continue once again, right? Because we don't want to sort of aim lock on dormant players, and we don't want to aim lock on dead players. Next, we're going to make sure that the player is an enemy, right? So if player get team is equal to globals local player get team continue, right? So if this player's team is equal to our local player's team, we're going to continue, right? Because that means that we are on the same team and we don't want to aim at enemies. Sorry, we don't want to aim at teammates. The last check we're going to make is if the player has gun game immunity. So if you don't know what that is, if player has gun game immunity, basically when you are in a deathmatch, as soon as you spawn in, there's a period where you are invincible, right? When you get to select your weapon and stuff. We don't want to be aimbotting on players that sort of have that, right? So we're going to go ahead and continue. That's sort of it for our entity checks. What we're going to do now is we're going to get the position of the bone that we want to aim at. So to do that, we first need to get the player's bone matrix. We can do that by creating a C matrix 3x4. We're going to call it bones, and this is going to be the size of 128. Next, we're going to say if exclamation mark setup bones, if exclamation mark player setup bones. The first parameter is going to be the array that we just created over here. So if you're not familiar with sort of the syntax, we've created a variable here called bones, and bones is 128 3x4 matrices. A 3x4 matrix is just it's an array of, it's a 2D array, 3x4. All right, so we're going to pass in the first parameter to setup bones is going to be this matrix. So setup bones is going to populate this matrix with the player's bones. Anyway. Next, the max bones we want to make is 128, the flag is 256, and the current time is interfaces, globals, current time. And we're putting this in an if statement because setup bones returns a boolean, so if it fails, we're going to go ahead and continue. All right, so we do want to make sure that this succeeds. By the way, there are better ways to go about this, but this is supposed to be a sort of simple tutorial, so yeah, shut up, Patok. Now that we have the player's bone matrix, this will allow us to get the player's head position, or maybe their neck position, or their pelvis position, depending on what bone you want to aim at. We actually need our eye position, so we can get that like so. We're going to declare a vector. We're going to call this local eye position. So this is going to be the position of our eyes, and we're going to say globals local player get eye position, and we're going to pass in this vector that we just made. So once again, this is going to be the player's bone matrix, and this is going to be our eye position. Now, the reason we need the player's bone matrix is to get the position of the player's bones in the world, and the reason we need our eye position is so that, well, number one, we're going to need it for when we do our aimbot calculation, but we're also going to need it for a visibility check, which we are going to do very soon. The last thing is we actually need to get our aim punch. We're going to make this aimbot automatically counter recoil for us. So let's go ahead and say our aim punch, and we can get aim punch in a very similar way to our eye position. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this. We're going to go ahead and paste this here, and we're going to call this aim punch. Now, the thing is, we don't want to counter recoil for things like shotguns, snipers, or pistols, because it just looks weird, right? You don't counter recoil for those things. They barely have any recoil anyway. You counter recoil for things that you spray with, like a rifle, like an AK or an M41AS or whatever it's called, so on and so forth. So what we're going to do is we're going to once again check the weapon type. So let's go ahead and switch on weapon type. We're going to check if the weapon is a C entity. So we're going to check if the weapon is a rifle, if the weapon is a submachine gun, or if the weapon is a machine gun. So if the weapon is a rifle, a submachine gun, or a machine gun, we do want to counter the recoil. So what we're going to do is we're going to populate this, right? We're going to say globals, local player, get aim punch, and we're going to pass in this aim punch vector, right? Otherwise, we're not going to have a default. It's just this aim punch vector is literally just going to be 0. Okay, it's going to be nothing, right? So only if we have a gun that we want to counter recoil for, this aim punch will have an angle. Anyway, now we can move on to our visibility check. To do the visibility check, what we're going to do is we're going to trace a ray from our eyes to the enemy player's head, or whatever bone you want to aim at. In our case, we're going to do the head, right? We're going to make our aimbot aim at player heads. What we're going to do is we're going to trace a ray from our face to the enemy's face, and if that ray hits, that means that they are not hidden behind anything. If the ray doesn't hit, it means that they are behind something, right? So we can do that like so. We're going to create a C trace object. We're just going to call that trace, and then we can call interfaces engine trace ray. Just like that, okay? Now this takes 4 parameters. The first parameter is a ray. So here we're going to the first parameter is a reference to an object of the ray class. So we can actually initialize that in place over here. And that's the first thing is going to be where we want the ray to start. And the second parameter is going to be where we want the ray to end. So we want the ray to start at our eye position, right? So we're going to use local eye position over here. And we want the ray to end where we at the enemy's head position, right? Wherever you want to aim on the enemy. So in our case, we're going to end our ray at the enemy's head position, which is going to be bones. We're going to index to 8 because 8 is the head position. If you want other bone indexes, hop onto Google and search for yourself. And we're going to say get origin. Sorry, just bones8.origin, right? So once again, this is creating an instance of the C-ray class. So maybe to make it more readable, C-ray like this. And the first parameter is going to be the start of the ray. The second parameter is going to be the end of the ray. So we're starting at local eye position. We're ending at the enemy's head position. The next parameter is going to be the mask of the ray. So we're going to use mask shot, which means that it's going to it's not going to go through walls. It's not going to go through anything that you can't shoot through. The next parameter is our trace filter. Sorry, I forgot a comma over here. The next parameter is going to be the trace filter, right? And who we are going to filter out is ourselves. We don't want the ray to hit ourselves because that means it's going to sort of hit us as soon as it starts because it's starting inside of our head. And last but not least, we are going to pass in this trace object, which is going to get filled with all of the trace data. So this is going to once again trace a ray from our head to the enemy's head, and if the line hits, that means that they are visible. And we can check that like so. So we're going to say if trace.entity. So this is a pointer to the actual entity that it hits. So we're going to check if it is actually valid. So we're going to say if !trace.entity. So if it's null pointer, or if trace.fraction is smaller than 0.97 f, right? So if basically the trace fraction, if you think about it, let's say we are tracing a ray from here. If we are tracing a ray from here to there, so pretend this is our eye position and then this is the enemy's head position. The fraction is a percentage of how far this went. So let's say the ray only traced about this far. That means that the fraction is going to be 0.5, right? Because it went half, right? But now let's extend this to like here. Let's say that's like an 87%. It's going to be 0.87, for example. So we're saying here if 0.97 is bigger than the fraction. So basically if the ray didn't go very far, if the ray didn't complete, we are going to exit out. I hope that makes sense. Okay, anyway, we're going to return. We're very close to being done here. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to do our sort of aimbot angle calculation, right? So we're going to create a C vector and we're going to call this enemy angle. And we're going to initialize this vector like so. This might get a little bit confusing. So first of all, we're going to make some brackets here and we're going to say bones 8 dot origin, right? So this is the enemy head position. What we're going to do is we're going to subtract our local eye position. right? So what this is doing is it is sort of, it is changing the origin of the vector from the world, because these two vectors are relative to the world. It's going to change the origin of the vector to our eye position, right? So now we're going to have the vector from our eyes to the enemy. What we're going to do is we're going to convert that to an angle, right? So this is going to sort of be mimicking our view angles in a way. And what we're going to do is we're going to subtract CMD view angles, and we're going to add aim punch. Now remember, aim punch will be 0 if we don't want to actually perform any aim punch. And the reason we're subtracting view angles is because we are going to add this result to view angles later. You'll see in just a moment. Next, what we need to do is check the FOV. So we're going to say if const float float FOV is equal to standard Aimbot, and we're going to get the hypotenuse of enemy angle dot x, enemy angle dot y. And yeah, so if you're not familiar with this syntax, we can actually initialize a local variable inside of the if statement. So you just need this, and I forgot, you need the semicolon over here, and then we can actually do the if statement. So if FOV is smaller than best FOV, we're going to set best FOV to FOV. We're going to set best angle to to enemy, just like that. And now we can leave our for loop, and we can say CMD view angles is equal to CMD view angles plus best angle, and we can add smoothing over here by scaling this angle. So let's say we want to smooth it by half. We're going to scale it by 0.5, just like that. Okay, so once again, to go over this code, what's happening is, right, so this is only going to get run if our local player is valid and alive, right? So then this function is going to get called. First, we're going to check if we are actually trying to shoot. If we're not trying to shoot, we're going to exit out of the function. Next, we're going to check if we are diffusing. If we are diffusing, we are going to exit out of the function. Next, we're going to get our active weapon. We're going to make sure that it's valid. We're then going to get the weapon type, and then we're going to switch on the weapon type. If the weapon is a machine gun, a rifle, a shotgun, a pistol, or a sniper, we're going to see if it has ammo. Does have ammo. We're going to check if it's a sniper, and if it is a sniper, we're going to make sure that we are scoped, and if all goes well, we're going to break. Right, break means that we're going to break out of this statement and move to this, right? If things don't go well and we hit any of these return statements over here, then it's going to once again exit the function. We don't want to do any aimbot. Next, we've set up over here our best angle and best FOV. This is going to be 0. This is going to be 5, right? So you can change this to change your FOV. This is the variable you want to change if you want to modify your FOV. Next, we have this algorithm over here where what we're doing is we're looping through the player list. We're getting a player, making sure it's valid, making sure they're not dormant, and making sure they are alive. We are then getting their team, and then we are checking if they have gun game immunity. Next, we get the player's bone matrix so that we can get bone positions. Then we're getting our eye position, and then we are setting up aim punch. Once again, this is going to be 0 initially. And if we are holding a rifle, a submachine gun, or a machine gun, we're going to get our aim punch, right? If we aren't holding any of these, aim punch is nothing, and we don't need to worry about it. Okay, next we're going to trace a ray from our eyes to the enemy's face. And if that ray hits, right, it's going from our eyes to the enemy's face. I should add over here, C trace filter, right? So it's going to go from our eye position to the enemy's head position. If the ray hits, then that means that they are visible. If it doesn't hit, we're going to return. Then finally, we are making a final vector called enemy angle, and we are subtracting our local eye position from the enemy's head position, converting that to an angle. Then we are subtracting our view angles and adding aim punch, and then we are calculating the FOV using the hypotenuse, and then we are comparing it to our current best FOV, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so long story short, what this for loop does is it gets basically the closest entity to us, the closest entity that is visible, that is a player, that is not dormant, all of this stuff, and it compares it to this FOV, right? And then last but not least, we are adding the best angle that we got to our view angles, and we are scaling this, right? So if you don't scale this, it's just going to be automatic lock-on sort of thing. Actually, let me show you what that looks like. What I've done over here is I've just said CMD view angles equals CMD view angles plus best angle. Let's go ahead and build this. All right, so I'm in game, I'm going to go ahead and inject here. If we take a look, you'll actually notice we have something like silent aim. As you can see, I don't even aim at the guy, and it's just annihilating him, right? And that is because if we come back to our code over here and we look at the hook, we're setting our view angles before we are running our aimbot. So this means that you don't see your view angles changing. Right, so if you're wondering how to make silent aimbot, that's how you go about doing that. Right, so as you can see, you don't have to aim at the guy, he just needs to be inside of your FOV range. Right, and this is obviously very overpowered when using this. I mean, like an AWP. right? And it's also FOV based, so it's not going to hit this guy, it's going to hit the guy behind him, whoever we're closer to. Yeah. Okay, but anyway, to fix that, if you don't want the silent aimbot, what we're going to do is we're going to take this, we're going to delete this, and we're going to put it under our aimbot. Cool. We can build that again. So right now it's not smoothed, right? So we're just going to automatically lock onto a guy if he's in the FOV range. So this isn't in the FOV. This is. To add smoothing, what we're going to do is we're going to come back to our aimbot.cpp and we're going to scale this best angle. Now what scaling is it's just, it's multiplying the vector by a factor, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to scale this vector by, let's say 0.5, right? So that means it's going to half the vector, essentially. Right, so make sure I've uninjected here by clicking end, and then we're going to go ahead and inject. Now, as you can see, it's smoother. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, that just about wraps up this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I know it's a bit different from the other videos I've been uploading. I have a math exam tomorrow, so I might go and study. Anyway, once again, massive shout out to my patrons. I absolutely love you guys. All the source code will be available to my patrons. And I have a Discord server if you want to come check it out. But other than that, hope you enjoyed the video. Hopefully you got some working aimbot, and I will check you guys in the next one. Cheers and peace out.